Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for March 30th through April 5th, 2025. So let's get right to it. Starting off with our news slide again, it has been a very busy week for strategic movement around the world. On the home front, obviously the biggest concern this week has been largely economic in nature as the White House has released its reciprocal tariff plan, which we'll get to in a moment. The effects of this are largely still working out. Things are happening very, very quickly, so it's probably going to be a few more days before we see any real solid changes. Right now, things are just too fluid to determine exactly how things are going to stand. Nevertheless, over in Eastern Europe, the war continues in Ukraine as before. Ukraine has very much fallen out of the news cycle as the economic impacts and things in the Middle East are heating up, but unfortunately no developments on that for this week. Over in the Far East, the Chinese naval drills in the vicinity of Taiwan have concluded, largely without any big changes other than every time China does one of these drills, they learn something new, and this time around it was really more of a focus on combined arms warfare and getting service branches to work with one another and improve communications and logistics and command and control, things like this. Things that you would absolutely need to be very sharp on if you were going to invade a nation like Taiwan. So China has most certainly been practicing that, and they have learned quite a bit. But most eyes around the world have been focused on the Middle East this week as what I'm hesitantly calling the surge has continued. Cargo flights from both Europe and from Southeast Asia have most certainly been flooding into the region, adding to the concerns that this whole force buildup in the Middle East might not actually be a bluff or any kind of power projection role primarily, but we'll get into that in just a moment. Speaking of strategic movements, I've created a very rudimentary fleet tracker here, just to add a little bit more context with regards to what is going on with regards to strategic movement. So, the past week has been host to significant American naval activity. On the West Coast, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group has deployed on a standard rotation to the Far East. The Carl Vinson CSG was the one that was stationed in the Pacific. However, CENTCOM announced earlier, a few days ago, that they will be taking operational control of the Carl Vinson, so there will be two aircraft carriers in CENTCOM's AOR until further notice, essentially. So right now in the Middle East, supporting various operations in the Middle East are the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group and the Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group. The Vinson's probably going to make their way into the Indian Ocean right about now, right as this brief comes out. So having two aircraft carriers in the Middle East is not entirely an oh my gosh, we're going to war tomorrow kind of indicator, but it is something to be mindful of. Except for the fact that there aren't two aircraft carriers in the Middle East. There are actually three. The French are also in theater. The Charles de Gaulle Carrier Strike Group is wrapping up her deployment to the Middle East. It was a standard training deployment, nothing out of the ordinary, but as of, I think, this morning, she was still spotted in Djibouti. So, she's still on station, kind of in the region, and it's going to be interesting to see if we're expecting some kind of shenanigans to go down in the Middle East over the next couple of weeks. You may see her either kind of linger on station for a bit, or shoot and scoot really quickly back up to her home waters to rest and refit so that she can come back out again if needed. Once again, this is really the only carrier in NATO that's, operationally, deployable at the moment, as far as I know. So, something to keep an eye on for sure. Also, unconfirmed reporting this week, I did want to mention it because even though we can't confirm it, this is one of those closed source things, but some closed source reporting that, mainstream media journalists are getting directly from their contacts in the Pentagon states that at least one THAAD battery and at least two Patriot batteries have been deployed from PACOM to the Middle East. The THAAD battery looks like it probably came from South Korea because there were a lot of, there was a boost, a noticeable increase in C-17 and C-5 traffic out of South Korea a few days ago, which was a little bit odd, and now we're kind of just putting two and two together. It's a very loose assessment, but it makes sense that a THAAD system would be deployed from South Korea to the Middle East. Same thing with the Iwo Jima. I've been keeping an eye on the USS Iwo Jima LHD-7, which is, once again, not slated for deployment anytime soon. She just wrapped up a pretty big exercise in the Atlantic a few days ago, or a couple weeks ago at least, and she's going through various modernization processes right now. So right now she's been moving around a lot, though. There are a lot of indications and warnings that she may be getting ready for a deployment, and it's nothing scheduled as far as I know. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. Unscheduled deployments of very large naval assets or non-standard deployments of naval assets or transferring one aircraft carrier from one AOR to another, these are big indications for something going on. Of course, there are always counter-arguments for that, but this is the real deal as it stands right now. Drilling down a little bit more specifically to the North American continent, I have continued to update what I'm very loosely calling the domestic terrorism tracker. My goal for this is maybe a little bit hard to convey at the moment, but generally speaking, this data set, among others that I'm working on, this data set in particular is meant to track all of the things that are not necessarily just routine street crime, but a little bit more high profile than that. It started off as tracking all the various domestic terrorism events, but as we all know, I don't particularly like that word terrorism because, well, it can be used in a bunch of different ways, and it's a very, very loose definition, so if anybody has any better idea for what I should call this, please let me know. But yeah, this is kind of the good baseline I'm laying down, and the reason that I'm trying to do this is so that we can look at charts like this. Again, this is very primitive. I've got much prettier ones in the works, but we can see that the latter half of the month of March experienced a burst of vandalism activity, but also other types of activities. You can start to see more colors come into the chart there at that point in time as well. We can start to see a diversification of these styles of more politically motivated attacks. So again, I know it's super boring. It's not super helpful for most of you out there. I know a lot of you just want the story, right? But these are the things that I'm working on kind of behind the scenes that will paint a more clear picture later. I promise it will make sense later on. So switching gears back to the economic front, let's talk about the North American trade tariffs as they are being implemented by the White House. These are the charts produced by the White House, so you're seeing the primary source material for which trade tariffs are going to go into effect with which nation. Again, it's a lot of data to take in, but really we only need to take a look at the first chart here. Even though we've got a total of 8 charts, really the first one is where most of the data is centered. So now, let me state right up front that I am most certainly not an economist. I really can't comment on a lot of these economic things with any accuracy. And as with anything in the world of economics, there is a lot of very vicious and vitriolic debate on a lot of this stuff. But let me just share with you 2 things that I'm kind of thinking about that might be helpful for you over the next week or so, while we're still waiting to see how these things kind of shake out. First of all, the immediate impact is largely going to be with industries which can't easily and quickly bring manufacturing back home. So all of this aside, let's talk solutions for a moment. It's never a good idea to panic. Panic is never helpful. It doesn't really help us at all in any situation, really. But being mindful of the impacts that could happen very, very quickly in the world of logistics is very, very helpful. Bottom line, if you need to buy something, know where that thing is made. Again, I don't have to tell you guys this. This is all just common sense kind of stuff, but considering that we are crossing the Rubicon or looking at the Rubicon in many ways these days, it's just important to recognize where we are at and take it from there, right? But anyway, we shall see, I suppose. So let's move over to our favorite island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia. As many of you noted this week, I updated some products regarding the B2 spirits that have been observed at Diego Garcia for deployed. This imagery is not open source imagery. Well, technically it is, but it's not free. You got to pay for it. This is commercial satellite imagery from March 30th showing 5 B2s. And we got some imagery a little bit more recently from April 1st that shows all 6. So at the moment, we have confirmed that at least 6 B-2 Spirit bombers are forward deployed to Diego Garcia, along with at least 6 KC-135 Stratotankers for refueling, obviously. Now, we can get way down into the weeds with this, but I did want to briefly mention, because I forgot to mention last time, these pill-shaped objects just to the north of the runway there, these are indeed hangars for B-2 Spirit bombers. So when it comes to numbers, theoretically, technically, there could be as many as 10. 4 in the hangars and 6 out on the runway. Now, I personally do not think this is likely. I think that the 6 that we see are the 6 that are there. Why do I think this? Well, essentially because we were able to bean count. This is something that kind of goes back to the world of intelligence and the Cold War, and essentially looking at satellite images and counting the beans as they move around on the map. In this case, airframes. Many an imagery analyst has made their living off of bean counting for their career, tracking the Soviets and Russian ships in and out of port like the Hunt for Red October, things like that. So we can do the same thing nowadays with things like strategic aircraft. So I will state that it is technically possible for 4 more B-2 Spirit bombers to have sneakily taken off from Whiteman Air Force Base and flown halfway around the world to land here and not be imaged by a satellite and very hush-hush gone right into the hangars. I don't think that's very, very likely, because all 6 of these we were able to track, and we were able to know how many were on the way because of the aviation traffic, as they were able to, they had to communicate with air traffic control, transiting various airspace corridors and things like that. Like I mentioned last week, there are only 20 of these around the country, so we only have 20 B-2 bombers in existence. But I failed to mention last week that not all of them are operational, and as of the congressional hearings on various military budget stuff from last year, the Pentagon states that their testimony is at least that 11 are operational. So this means that right here on this image, you are looking at over half of America's entire long-range stealth bomber force. That's a pretty big deal. B-2s do fly around the world. They are seen doing exercises. They even targeted the Houthis a while back, a couple of months ago, as a matter of fact. So they do get around. But for deploying 6 to 1 base, I mean, that's pretty rare. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. I don't think I've ever seen this many B-2s in one place outside of Whiteman Air Force Base. If it's a bluff, it's one that we've never made before. So that's all I can say so far. But more generally speaking, if we just acknowledge the fact that there are these 6 bombers are here, and we've forward deployed such a huge number of these bombers to this one base in the middle of nowhere, what are they for? Well, in short, probably this place. This is Iran's Natanz nuclear site. So this is one of, I believe, 2 facilities which are kind of like the main nuclear facilities for the Iranian development of nuclear weapons. The Iranians have a lot of nuclear sites sprinkled all around their country, but this is one of the main ones that would probably be used, and let me explain why. So if we add some overlays here, we can see this is a normal nuclear facility, right? We've got the standard stuff that you might expect, of course, processing facilities for all kinds of precursor materials. We've got underground enrichment halls and facilities for enriching uranium and the processing of various minerals, and all kinds of administrative buildings and power plants and transportation facilities, all kinds of stuff. It's just a military base that conducts the enrichment of uranium, right? No surprises here. Well, the real secret of why these B-2s are probably at Diego Garcia lies a little bit to the south. So if we shift our map just a little bit to the south, we can still see the main base at the top of the slide here. We can look down into the mountains a little ways. And this, my friends, is probably why these B-2s are at Diego Garcia. It may look like a nondescript mountain to you and me, but rest assured, there are a lot of underground facilities here. And as we can see by the hardened bunker entrances here at the bottom left, there is an entire labyrinth of underground storage facilities that may or may not already contain nuclear weapons. So either way, this is probably why the B-2s are here, because if we take a more data-centric approach, we can just do 5 minutes of research on the internet and find out that to target an underground facility that's potentially hundreds of feet underground, you would need exactly one type of munition, the GBU-57, otherwise colloquially known as the bunker buster. Now, there are a few other munitions that work as well with these types of things. However, this is the tool for the job. If you're trying to use the correct tool for the correct job, this is exactly the only tool you would probably use to take out these facilities. Again, there are other options, but if we're thinking like a general, this is what you would need. You would need a bunch of B-2s carrying a bunch of GBU-57s and dropping these bombs, not on the entrances, but on where the main underground storage halls and facilities are located. So, this is the deck stacked, right? We have half of our bombers overseas at some podunk island in the middle of nowhere, and these bombers, the B-2s that are at Diego Garcia, fun fact, they are the only bombers that are currently, at least publicly, certified to carry the GBU-57. So we've got the right tools for the job, the right platforms to carry those tools in the theater, and stationed at a base which is within range of these facilities. So this is why we're trying to unfold the mystery. Is this a bluff or is this something else? This is where the grand question comes in. Has the Rubicon been crossed? Because as far as I can tell right now, there are many different theories about what's going on in the Middle East. Not just with the B-2s, though that is a fascinating aspect of it. The B-2s, the carriers were moving around, moving THAADs and Patriots around. You know, we're starting to add up a lot of random facts and random details that are starting to paint a picture. And so far, there are 2 main theories. So the first theory is that this is all power projection. The United States doesn't really intend to do this. this, but we want to make the Iranians think that we will. And because of that, the Pentagon and CENTCOM is undergoing this very elaborate, very, very elaborate demonstration of power, which still, by the way, falls into the aspect of military deception, because demonstration is a type of military deception, right? It is an ambiguity decreasing operation, meaning that it's an operation that is intended to make your adversary more certain of what your plan is, right? So if you're an Iranian general right now, it sure does look like the United States is getting ready to bomb your country, doesn't it? So that's kind of theory one. Theory two is a lot more nefarious, and it's a lot more black-pilling, if you will. So the other theory is that this is not a bullying move. This is not a move intended to force the Iranians to be scared, but this is actually a legitimate wartime preparation. This is what we would see if we're actually going to war with Iran, and that's really it. It's not really, I mean, if they're scared about it, then that's, a side benefit, but essentially the second theory is that the Rubicon has been crossed. And just as a side note, for those of you who don't know what this reference is, crossing the Rubicon, this is an analogy that goes back to the time of Julius Caesar back in 49 BC, I believe, in which Julius Caesar, right, was kind of puttering around with his army in the district of Gaul, where he was governor at the time, and an actual river, really more of a small stream than anything else, separated his district from the administrative boundary of Rome. And at the time, it was illegal. It was an act of war. It was a huge deal to cross over that river, Rubicon, with an army. And Julius Caesar knew this, and as his army was crossing over this river, he knew that once he crossed over to the other side, that he would essentially be committing treason, and he would be committed to his attack. So there was no turning back once you've crossed the Rubicon. You've kind of committed to your military advance. So today, in short, the term crossing the Rubicon is essentially synonymous with crossing a point of no return. Now, the second theory, like I mentioned, is that maybe the White House is standing in the Rubicon right now. Maybe they're not fully committed right now to a war with Iran, or maybe they are. Who knows? I mean, if a decision had been made, if Trump had secretly and covertly made a decision weeks ago to go to war with Iran, and all we're doing is checking down the calendar, you wouldn't see anything different. So that's kind of one of the big bits of evidence that's stacking up to say that maybe theory 2 has a lot of weight as well. Of course, we want to think it's just power projection. We want to think that it is indeed just a posturing move to get the Iranians to do what we want. Now, again, the original question of why are we involved in any of this at all? Well, that's another story for another time. But seeing as we're here now, the American people are trying to figure out, is their government trying to bluff Iran, or is their government committing the American people to another GWAT? And at the moment, I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you. There are a lot of other sub-theories that maybe come about. Like, for instance, there's a lot of credence to the theory that, well, maybe it's not for the Iranians. Maybe it's not for any of these complexes, underground bunkers where the Iranians are storing nuclear material. Maybe that's not what we're going for. Maybe it's the Houthis. I'm not going to say there isn't a lot of evidence to say, well, maybe we deployed half of our long-range bombers to, take out the Houthis. I mean, it would definitely be using a cannon to kill a mosquito, but I don't know. It's a new era. It's a new Pentagon. Maybe they think they can do it. I don't know. The Rubicon idea is definitely a central aspect and will be important to think about over the next few weeks as more and more evidence starts stacking up. It's all based on a balance. What do you think? Where is the reasonable doubt? Is there more evidence in pile A, or is there more evidence in pile B? So all in all, I know this is not particularly helpful, but generally speaking, this is kind of where we're at. There are going to be a lot more indications and warnings come about over the next few days, weeks, months, years. And trying to keep a more neutral perspective and acknowledging the very serious concerns when they do appear is going to be critical, because I think a lot of times we're tempted to stick our heads in the sand and say, no, this isn't happening, and no, it's just a big bluff. And that may not be the best perspective moving forward. If nothing else, that's why I'm kind of paying attention to this, because, I'm not saying it's happening. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that it's happening, but I see the potential for us to get dragged into another very bad conflict in the Middle East, and I'm a little bit concerned about that. So that's why I buy these satellite images. That's why I keep an eye on this, and hopefully I'll look like a fool. I would really be happy if I looked like a complete idiot for spending so much time on this in a few weeks, and all these planes go home, and everything's hunky-dory again. I would be the happiest person in the world. But until that happens, I've got to keep buying satellite images. So wrapping things up for today, I know I've talked way too long, too much coffee today, I'm afraid, but wrapping things up with the GhostNet, I'm afraid that I missed the GhostNet window this week. I was preoccupied with some other stuff, and by the time I got on, I only heard a few SNR requests, so that's totally my fault, but anyway, the propagation by the time I got on wasn't too great anyway, so if you were out there, I probably wouldn't have heard you anyway. I'm trying to work on my antenna, doing a little bit of spring cleaning with antenna work and things like that, so you guys know how it is. I'm no different than all of you who make this network a great thing, so I've still got to get my practice reps in too, just like everybody else. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Here are the sources as usual, and you guys know the drill. Clickable links are on my Obsidian page for each day of reporting. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for sticking with me this time. I will keep working on the projects I'm working on. I've got some other irons in the fire too, and we'll see how that pans out next week, but hopefully we'll get some more good news next week, so thank you guys all for watching. Thank you for all of your support. I couldn't do it without you. I seriously mean that. And I will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.